Yarnsub.com is the best place to find out if products are a good match. There are 3 different ways that I go about substituting yarn using this website. If I need an exact match, like for contrasting color that one brand doesn't have, I can put the recommended yarn into Yarnsub and it's going to give me a list of the most comparable yarns in its database. Then I could find one that has the right colorways and isn't discontinued. The purple and black shawl that I showed you earlier was worked up first in Misty Alpaca, chunky, and that was 2 hanks of that, and then I was out and the shawl was really small. But as it so happened, this comparable yarn, Cascade Yarns Baby Alpaca Chunky, was for sale at Kudzu Cottage up in Pikeville, and I was able to buy a hank of that in black and add a contrast trim to extend the shawl. Another way I use Yarnsub is to check the products available at a local yarn store that I want to order from against the recommended yarn. So for instance, I have a baby sweater that I'm going to be making. I've got it saved in my favorites. And the recommended yarn is Madeline Tosh DK. Now I don't want to use that. That's a superwash wool. That is going to have a little bit of durability, but not as much as I want in a toddler sweater, and it's going to be too warm for early spring here in Tennessee. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over and I'm going to look that yarn up. Madeline Tosh DK. And it's going to spit out comparable yarns, and I don't care what those comparable yarns are because I'm not trying to do a one-for-one substitute here. I just basically want to see what is the recommended gauge on this yarn. Now, for my substitute, I knew that I wanted to order for one of the local yarn stores that I like to be loyal to, and here's one up in Haymarket, Virginia. Looks like they're moving to Gainesville, Virginia. How are they needles in the Haymarket if they're needles in the Gainesville? And I went and looked in their DK weight. And I started just going through. And eventually I found my way to this yarn right here. So I knew they carried a yarn that had a nylon acrylic blend with a range of colors. I wanted to see, the suggested gauge is listed here, but I wanted to make sure also on Yarnsub that they seem to have a comparable gauge. So right here, the Madeline Tosh DK, it recommends 20 to 22 stitches on a US 6 or 7. And here's that yarn. It recommends 22 stitches on a US 6. So I felt pretty comfortable ordering this yarn. The last way to use Yarnsub, or the last way that I use Yarnsub, is to just put into the search box the properties that you want. You put the gauge, the fiber, if you want to put the construction in, you can see what comes up. So I knew that I wanted to match 22 stitches. And if you just put in 22 stitches, the first hit that comes up is a fingering weight. So if you do 22 stitches, you can add DK. That's great. And the first one that's recommended, Barocco Vintage DK, is an acrylic and wool blend, which is already a little bit better for my purposes than that original 100% wool. But, you know, I did want it to be like a summer sort of a yarn. What happens when you add that nylon? And now you start to see some yarns that are comparable to the one I ended up selecting. In fact, here is the one that I ended up selecting. Right here, the Surtur Snuggly DK. Ravelry's advanced search options are also terrific for finding yarn substitutions. So we have got this Iris pullover. If you click on Yarn Ideas, you can see which yarns have been used most often. And most often people have selected the yarn that the designer recommended. That's usually going to happen. But over here you can see that that Barocco Vintage DK was used 3 times. And you can click on that and see how it worked up and whether you like it or not. And I think that's very pretty. Oh, wow. See? I like that quite a lot. If you don't want to look at it that way, you can also do an advanced search. I always filter my yarn searches so that I am excluding discontinued yarns. So I know I wanted a DK yarn. Let's say we know that we want some nylon content. Okay. And then I don't sort by best match. I sort by most projects because I figure that is going to give me the yarns that are the most widely available on the market right now. And so the first thing that comes up is a silk blend, and that is too rich for my blood. That's not going to no babies. But here's that vintage DK again. And here's the Snuggly DK. And so you can see they're very popular. If you click on them, you can start to see the projects that people have made. And then you can filter them to a project comparable to the one that you want to do and see how that works out. So for instance, pattern category clothing. I want to take a look at this in a pullover. And I only want it to show me projects where people have finished the project and posted photos. And so I can start to see how that yarn works up as a pullover, which, you know, some people seem to have miscategorized that. One thing that's great about this is that when you are looking at multiple colors in the same yarn, you can see what they look like when they're used together instead of trying to guess based on individual screenshots on the retailer's website. So right here, this person has used all this one brand of yarn. Sometimes you get in there and discover that they've been mixing different brands, but right here you can see how these particular colors look when they're all held together. So if you are looking for a colorwork project, you want to make sure there's enough contrast. Like I could tell that I wouldn't want to use that purple and that gray together because they don't have enough contrast for me. Neither do the green and the gray, maybe not the orange and the gray. But I would feel comfortable doing a stranded colorwork project with the blue and the gray or the red and the gray. Lots of people enjoy buying project kits or ordering the yarn that designers suggest for their patterns. It is a great way to support small batch yarn producers and get familiar with new products. But if you have a budget or specific colors you want to use, or if you're loyal to your favorite local yarn store, or if you have standbys you're familiar with, and it's really great to have that predictability because that ensures good results in a fitted project. Or maybe you're on a mission to sample as many yarns out there as you can, or you want to only use organic or US grown or heritage breed yarns. Maybe you're crafting for somebody who isn't comfortable with wool. There are a lot of reasons you're going to need to be able to successfully substitute yarns. So with these tools, you should be able to do that just fine.